Who does not want fast, very fast loading websites? Optimizing WordPress websites can be tricky as there are so many variables involved in it. Today, we have the person behind the hugely popular auto-optimize plugin to share his WordPress optimization routine. So let's welcome Frank Goossens on the show and get started. Hi, Frank. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine. Thank you. How are you?
I am doing good. Just to let you know, I've been using your plugin for so many years and I didn't know you were behind it. So thank you for
Okay.
making such amazing plugin and keeping it updating as
Thank
and
you.
when, WordPress wants to pull you out of certain things. Okay, so before we begin, why don't you give you a little introduction about your online life? Like, how did you start your online journey and went on with building or maintaining such amazing plugin?
Okay, so I started on the internet back in 1995.
Wow.
I'm 50 in the meantime. I started out. I was unemployed at the time, and so I knew someone who was working at the university, and they had free internet access. And I started playing around with that, doing small stuff in HTML, and approximately a year and a half later, I was offered a job at a company, local company, who wanted to start doing things on internet. And ever since, I have been working on internet-related stuff, either as a product manager, as a project manager. I've been doing technological consultancy. I've been doing solution architecture, lots of things over the last 20 years. So lots of internet there, and I really love the web and everything web technology behind it. Whilst working at different companies in internet-related uh, jobs, I started blogging back in 2003, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of years later, switched from I don't remember which platform to WordPress in 2007. And soon after, I wanted to make small tweaks, small improvements. For example, your typical tag cloud. I didn't want to see tags. I wanted to see my categories in there. Small change, and
Yeah.
I changed the codes without really making a plugin. But that was my first step. And then slowly but surely, I got obsessed with page speed, with website speed, and the first plugin. It started out as a pure JavaScript solution, but I turned it into WordPress plugin. Was a solution to make YouTube videos load faster, or rather to make pages that contain YouTube videos faster, because YouTube, uh, even more so back in the day when it was still entirely Flash, it made pages render more slowly. So that's how I created WP YouTube Lite, and that was my first plugin.
Okay.
A couple of years later, I started playing around with JavaScript and CSS optimizing plugins.
Mm-hmm.
The first one, I don't even remember the name, but it didn't really take off. And then I switched to autoptimize,
Okay.
which I tried out, which I liked because it could turn small CSS background images into inline code in the CSS, reducing the need for an extra download. This is less important now, but at the time, pre-HTTP2, it made a big difference. And that's why I started using Autoptimize. I had a couple of improvements, bug fixes, for which I contacted the original author, because I am not the original author, the original developer.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, sorry, but I'm not interested in Autoptimize anymore. Why don't you take over?
Okay.
And that's what I did in, I think, 2013. And ever since, I have been making small improvements, adding new functionality, and keeping on updating autoptimize to where it is now.
Okay, so
Yeah,
since that day till now, you've been into the auto optimized world, right?
yeah, yes, indeed.
Okay, so let's start with WordPress optimization. Now, let's first talk about the base infrastructure. Like, before we get down with website optimization, how important is the base infrastructure components like web hosting, theme being used, and so on?
Um, well, if you're starting out and you say I want to have it, let uh, let's put it differently. A couple of 5 years ago, everyone was talking about mobile first design.
Yeah.
The idea being, if you want to make a website that works well on mobile, design it on mobile first, and then add desktop functionality. Progressive enhancement, great idea. I'm absolutely a fan of that. But this also applies to performance. You should do performance first, ideally, and in that case, you make sure to choose an excellent server environment. You choose a light theme, which ideally does not even require jQuery to be present. It doesn't include jQuery of its own. And you start building on that.
Okay.
Hosting wise, there are lots of options, of course. You can go to manage WordPress hosting. You've got a couple of big ones there. You could try to do it yourself. I have a couple of VPSs which I manage myself.
Mm-hmm.
You could even go for shared hosting. There are a number of hosters that offer good shared hosting, which can be sufficient. It all depends on what your needs are actually, the amount of traffic you're expecting, and the big question always is how static or how dynamic is your site. If you're doing WooCommerce with a lot of products and checkout and stuff, that's entirely dynamic, and that requires a very different infrastructure than your typical communications websites with pages that are that can be rendered statically by using a cache plugin or something.
So when you get new clients who are starting out or who have sites on existing hosting, like, do you have any no-go list for these hosting that I'm not going to do optimization for these specific hosts? I'm not asking you to name them. It's just like, do you have this thing?
We do have I have two companies in mind, and if we see a customer of ours, because we indeed do performance optimization, we provide performance optimization services, and if I see one of the two companies I have in mind mentioned as the hoster, then that's a red flag for us, and we tell the customer in general that we indeed can try to help him or her,
Okay.
but that we have experience with said hoster that leads us to believe that it would be better if they would move.
And someone, when you get a new client and he's looking for suggestions from you, like which hosting or which, theme setup I should use, do you have any recommended specific in there as well?
Yes.
You can name them here.
Yeah,
These are good ones.
positive, then we can indeed. Teams Astra.
Okay.
And GeneratePress is pretty neat as well.
Mm-hmm.
My partner in performance, that's the guy who works with me on the performance optimization, is a fan of Divi. And then hosting wise, thinking about WP Engine, thinking about Kinsta. And for complex WooCommerce sites, Liquid Web has a very nice offering and focuses very much on everything related to WooCommerce and performance. So they're great choices as well.
Okay, so when you get a client with existing website, the first thing obviously is you test what is going on with the website before you get on with it. So there are popular tools like GTmetrix, Pingdom, or do you use some secret tool for website testing?
There's no secret. In general, we use three tools.
Mm-hmm.
GGMatics is a bit, the base is it's quick and it gives you a great view on what is happening. The tool that it goes more in depth but is somewhat more complex, less user friendly, is webpagetest.org, which does not give the same nice report in PDF format GTmetrix does, but which allows you, for example, to do, instead of doing just one test, which might show you an exceptionally low or an exceptionally high load time, depending on circumstances. Webpagetest.org allows you to do 3 tests or 5 tests or 9 tests, and can then plot your average and median results for different KPIs, for the time to first byte, for the onload time, for number of requests, for a whole lot of KPIs. And the advantage there is that the chance, if you're looking at the median or the average, then you're pretty sure that you've got a representative number. Whereas if you only do one test, maybe it's too optimistic, maybe it's too pessimistic, it's harder to say. And then the third tool, which always comes up, because our customers start out with that tool, of course, is Google PageSpeed Insights, which have gotten a lot better the last year, let's say. But which, unfortunately, but I understand completely why they do it like that, but unfortunately, the thing people focus on is the score. And they contact us saying, I want 100 score on mobile. Can you do that? Google PageSpeed Insight Score is just a means to an end, meaning that Google wants us collectively to care about page speed and give people a number, give people a percentage, and they want to improve. So that's what Google is doing. It's some kind of gamification of the performance of being actively involved in performance. So what I generally do is tell people, okay, Google PageSpeed Insights, the score, don't look at it. The thing that is important and which is very helpful are the times that are in there since the last update, but also the recommendations. The problem is that most people don't read those or don't understand those, and sometimes they're even rather contradictory. In that sense, if you think about if you think there are 2 important ones which are related to the use of critical CSS, which I'm sure you'll have questions about as well. So that there is remove render blocking resources on one hand, and typically on a non-optimized site, you will see a lot of CSS and JavaScript files in there. And on the other hand, you have the recommendation, remove unused CSS. And in the text that explains remove unused CSS, at a certain point, they do mention defer unused CSS. But the title is remove unused CSS. And even if the unused CSS or if the full CSS is deferred, you will still get the warning. So it's not a perfect tool, and it can lead to some confusion, but I think we cannot ignore it. And it has gotten a lot better since, when was the last update? March or something, I'm not sure.
Okay, so when you do this website speed testing, the initial one, do you pick a specific country location, or you do it at a random location, or the client's main visitors from where they're coming? You use that one?
We in general, we check where the customer is located.
Okay.
And based on that, and based on his or her website, try to, because this is even before we provide them with feedback, it's after they contact us, we do a kind of a small pre-sales test. And for that one, we try to identify the location which is closest to their customer. And on GTmetrix, if you have an account there, which is free, everyone should have that,
Yeah.
that can indeed pick a location.
Yep.
The list isn't huge, so you have a lot more locations on webpagetest.org.
Okay.
But still, on GTmetrix, we choose a location closest to where we assume the customers are located.
Okay, so testing is done. Now let's talk about the main components that we need to optimize. Like the first thing is images. Like big size images can add a lot of bloat and drag the website down in terms of loading speed. So how does you tackle image optimization on the website?
Three possibilities. First
Okay.
possibility, images are optimized before they are uploaded in WordPress. That is something a lot of people don't do.
Yep.
You can do it, but of course, one should take into account that when uploading an image, WordPress will create different versions of it, different sizes, and those different size images might not be optimally saved either. So next step, you can use a image optimization plugin. Our favorite there, and it's a partner of mine, is ShortPixel. Their standard plugin, their legacy plugin, so to call it, is installed on the server. It communicates with the image optimization servers of ShortPixel, but saves the optimized images on your own server. That's one possibility. And another possibility, and that is since earlier this year, there is an image optimization feature in autoptimize, which actually integrates with ShortPixel's image optimization CDN. So they have an entirely external solution, which is online, where you simply tick that box in autoptimize, and it will automatically autoptimize will automatically change the URLs for your images into the URL on which the same images can be fetched but optimized.
Yep.
And that's the CDN URL from ShortPixel. So big difference there is versus the normal ShortPixel, the legacy plugin, let's say.
Okay.
That your images are not, the optimized version of your images are not saved on your server. They are stored at the ShortPixel CDN.
Okay.
The optimization is on the fly, and there is logic in autoptimize to conditionally load WebP images, which are even smaller, in browser that support WebP.
Okay, and now let's talk about CSS files. Now there are a lot of, besides the theme CSS file or files, depending on the theme you're using, there are a lot of CSS files that get loaded and created by other plugins, and even when you're using a page builder. How should one try to eliminate additional CSS file or handle the multiplicity of CSS files that drag your loading speed down?
Well, the problem with CSS files, as with JavaScript files, is that they, if a browser, so the browser fetches the HTML, which has the link in it for the different CSS file, and every time it sees a link for this CSS file, it stops rendering, or it waits to render until that CSS file is downloaded.
Yep.
So that means that is what Google is trying to say in their Google PageSpeed Insight tools. Those CSS files are render blocking. And the less render blocking elements you have in your HTML, the faster the page will start rendering in the browser, which means simply that your users have a better experience because they will see your site, or at least the first parts of your site, displayed sooner. So the thing to do there is to try to minimize the amount of render blocking files. And there are two things that typically autoptimize can do. It can aggregate all CSS files, and then instead of having 20 render blocking files, you have only one, which will obviously be bigger because it's a combination of all those files. And the second thing, and that is what we do for most of our customers indeed, is we use the inline and defer option in autoptimize, which allows one to have autoptimize inline the CSS that is needed to render the page immediately.
That's better.
And the full CSS is loaded later and is not render blocking anymore. So that means that you have your HTML and there is inline CSS, which is not render blocking. So if we forget about JavaScript for a second, then the browser can render your page immediately.
So this inline CSS is a better option to use, right?
Is inline. So to be clear, there are two options which are named similarly. There is inline all CSS, and there is inline and defer CSS.
Okay.
The first option inlines all CSS, but there is a big disadvantage. The size of your HTML will get a lot larger.
Okay.
And the CSS, which is entirely inline, is not reusable on other pages. So the difference between inline all CSS and inline and defer CSS is that for inline and defer CSS, only the CSS which is needed to render the above default page is inline. So you have a small amount of CSS inline. The full CSS is loaded later. So that is, from a performance point of view, the best solution. Now, the problem, of course, is that your above default CSS, your critical CSS, is potentially different for each page on your site. So by default, autoptimize on the settings screen allows you to paste the critical CSS, but it will add the same critical CSS to each page, and that might not apply. And what you would see as a result is that on the pages where it does apply, the page renders correctly immediately, but on pages where it does not apply, you will see some elements moving around as the full CSS is loaded, which is what you want to prevent as well. So what we have to fix that is an integration plugin, which is called autoptimize critical CSS.com power up.
Okay.
And that power up hooks into autoptimize. It gets its own tab on the settings screen, and it allows you to integrate with criticalcss.com, which is a paying solution of a company which does nothing but offer the service to extract the critical CSS for a given page. And when you use that, so you combine autoptimize with that critical CSS solution, then that power up automatically creates rules which know on which page what critical CSS to inject.
So it will be different critical CSS per page depending on what's...
Indeed. And that is even more the case when you're using a page builder.
Yeah.
Because for a normal blog post, then your page layout for a blog post is always the same. You might have an image or something, but your blocks are always the same, more or less.
Yeah.
But if you're using a page builder, then every page can have its own layout. So indeed, you do need specific critical CSS for each page.
And if you dig deeper into this combining CSS files into one file, I don't know, I've seen two schools of thought. One says you should combine all the CSS file into one file. The other says you should keep few CSS file randomly or simultaneously loading because of HTTP2 protocol, something like that. Like, is this something relevant here?
HTTP2 is great, and performance has become easier that way.
Okay.
But it does not solve everything. HTTP2, for example, does not make a file non-render blocking. So even in HTTP2, a CSS file will remain render blocking. Even when on HTTP2, when you have a lot of files, it will slow down as well. So it's not as extreme as in HTTP 1.1 times, but still, if you have a lot of files loaded, then you do have limitations there as well. So it depends, and my reply to people asking me, should I aggregate, combine or not, is just test. Autoptimize can aggregate but does not have to. You can untick that box. That was added in 2018, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So you can optimize your site with autoptimize and not combine, not aggregate your CSS. And you can still use inline and defer. The difference being that if you are not aggregating, then instead of having 1 or 2 CSS files that are deferred, you will have 10 or 20. But they will, given the fact that you are using inline and defer, they will not be render blocking anymore.
So to summarize, combining CSS file is still a better option than, letting them parallelly load.
One should, it's best response is test. In some cases, it's better to combine. I'm sure in some cases, it's better not to combine.
Okay. So let's talk about JavaScript files now. Optimizing script files can create more problems than CSS itself. Now, the suggestion of moving JavaScript files toward the head part of the website, like, is it recommended in all the cases or only where things are not working when you're combining script files?
In general, the default settings of autoptimize is that all JavaScript is aggregated and is loaded late in the footer at the end of the HTML with the defer flag, which means that the JavaScript is loaded late and is executed after DOM content loaded before the onload event, if I'm not mistaken, to avoid the JavaScript to slow the rendering of the page down again. The exception in the default configuration is jQuery. So in our default configuration, jQuery is not aggregate, and the inline JavaScript is left in place as well. Reason for those two things: first of all, jQuery, a lot of themes and plugins expect jQuery to be available immediately. So that's why by default we exclude it. And inline JavaScript is excluded because that often contains specific variables or values for variables which change over time, such as nonces, or which change with every page. And if we would aggregate that, that would cause the auto-optimize cache to grow quickly. Because if you aggregate all JavaScript on one page, and it has all inline JavaScript in there as well, then if only one variable changes in there, then you will have to re-minify that file and put it in cache as well.
Yep.
So to avoid having to do that continuously, which also has an impact and which makes the cache grow quickly, inline JavaScript is by default not aggregated either. In case issues arise, I tend to tell people, instead of forcing JavaScript in head, I tell people that ideally they find the JavaScript, the specific JavaScript file to exclude from being aggregated and exclude just that.
Okay, so besides this, are there any do's and don'ts while handling JavaScript file minification, and the methodology to find which JavaScript file to exclude from the optimization routine?
That can be difficult. The procedure that I follow is that I look at the site with JavaScript optimization on, I check the browser console for JavaScript errors.
Mm-hmm.
I then, in the second tab, open the same page with autoptimize disabled,
Mm-hmm.
which you can do. You don't have to change settings there. You just add question mark AO underscore optimize equals 1 to the URL. And then you get the same page without auto-optimize being active. And then typically, if you get an error, value not defined or method not defined or whatever, you can use the name of the methods or of the variable mentioned in the error, and in your browser's developer tools, you can then do a search for that variable or method name in the non-optimized version of your JavaScript, and it will show you the hits. I do this in Firefox, but I guess this is also available in other browsers. So that allows me to see what files are, which original files, non-optimized files contain that variable. And then it's a question of, if there's more than one, to try the 2 or 3 files that do have a match to see if that fixes the problem. Often there is only one file, so that's clear.
Okay, so besides
using the developer tools and comparing the optimized and the non-optimized sites to try to find the CSS file that needs executing.
Okay, so besides CSS and JavaScript, the other important thing is Google Fonts. Like, so many fonts, so many calls. So how do you optimize, with regard to Google Fonts on the website?
Yeah. Me personally, I remove them. I don't want Google Fonts. I don't care about typography.
But I'm sure the clients that you get, they all love Google Fonts. They don't want to remove them.
Yeah. So autoptimize on the extra tab has a number of options to optimize Google Fonts.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is remove Google Fonts.
That's your favorite.
Who don't want to do that, there are 3 other options. One is aggregate the Google Font CSS normally, which means that it is loaded immediately and your fonts can be used immediately, but it is render blocking. The second option is aggregate the CSS and preload it. And preloading means that it is not render blocking, but the fonts will load a little later, meaning that it is possible that either, and that depends on the browser, the page isn't displayed until the fonts are loaded, or the page is displayed with the system fonts and they switch to the Google Fonts afterwards. And the third option, or the fourth option rather, is the option to load the Google Fonts using webfont.js, which seems to be not as proactive, not as much advocated by Google anymore. Last time I checked, I didn't see it mentioned on the Google Font site, but it was a project in which Google and I think Adobe and Typekit collaborated to create a JavaScript component that loaded fonts based on an object of JavaScript. And that one loads the fonts a bit later even. I think the sweet spot here is the aggregate and preload. And since approximately 1 month, Google has support for the font display option, which is a CSS property. It isn't supported by autoptimize natively yet. It will in the next version. But on my blog, I have a small blog post of how to force that to be added to the auto-optimized Google Fonts CSS anyway. So it can be done already.
Okay,
And
so
the advantage there is that font display option, instead of letting browsers decide if they start out with a system font and then switch or not, and how long it takes and stuff like that, you can use the font display property to tell the browser so to do.
okay, so another thing, if you embed a YouTube video on a homepage, it loads so many external files just to render that, player. So how do you
Oh,
tackle that when clients are adamant, no, I do want a video embedded here?
well, that's where my very first plugin becomes relevant again, and I still support it as WP YouTube Lite,
Uh-huh.
which will turn a normal YouTube embed into let's call it a dummy player. It looks like a YouTube video, but it just loads a background image, your YouTube thumbnail, and some player UI elements, which are actually in uh, in one file, and it renders that dummy player, and it's only when you click on the dummy player that it actually loads the real YouTube video. So that's, you could call that kind of lazy loading solution for YouTube videos, and that indeed has a very positive impact on the page loading when YouTube videos are embedded.
Awesome. So now let's switch gears and talk about your toolbox. So which are your 5 current favorite tools that power your online business?
I love my Linux laptop. I'm a Ubuntu user. I have been using Linux for over 10 years now.
Mm-hmm.
I was even able to, after long discussions, to convince my wife and daughter to switch to Linux as well. And they're not too unhappy, so that's good. Have always been a Mozilla/Firefox user.
Mm-hmm.
I use the tool I love dearly is Trello, which I use for communicating with internally with my performance team.
Mm-hmm.
We have lists, and each customer gets a card on Trello, and it moves from prospect to current job to finished job. We add due dates. We communicate about customers, about things to think about, stuff like that. So I really love Trello. It's a great tool. I hope it stays great now that they've been bought. What else? Yeah, that's about it.
Do you use a page builder? If yes, which is your recommended one?
No, I don't use page builder.
And most clients that you get, and they must be using some page builder. What is the most popular among them?
I think WP Bakery.
I think that's Visual Composer.
Yeah, what used to be Visual Composer indeed. Yeah, very confusing.
And do you do email marketing?
No.
Okay.
No. I lied. I do use a page builder on autoptimize.com, where we offer the optimization services. That is built with Beaver Builder. Yeah, I forgot.
Awesome. I love Beaver Builder.
Yeah. I played around with Elementor as well, but I like Beaver Builder more. It felt more intuitive to me. I had some.
Yeah, it is more simpler user interface as compared to Elementor. Like it's like more. It doesn't feel like alien, something like load to. It's not that glossy. It just works.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
And any upcoming tool or service that has caught your attention recently?
No, not specific. Not something that comes to mind immediately. No.
Okay, cool. So anyone who's struggling in, building numbers, percentages in their website optimizations, efforts. Should they be obsessed with increasing their percentage or the load time?
Load time. It's always about time, because your end user, someone who goes to your site, they don't see a percentage, and they don't care about percentages. What do they care about? They want the page to be visible as soon as possible and to be usable as soon as possible. So it's all about the main KPIs should be those that can be expressed in milliseconds.
Mm-hmm.
Percentage does not apply. That's just a way for Google to gamify web performance and to let people both say, look, I have 95. No, I have 75.
Yeah.
So it's about the main KPIs are indeed the first paying time, the onload time, the time to interactive, things like that.
And if a person is still struggling to increase the speed of the website, they can definitely contact you because you provide customized service for that, right?
Yeah. Well, there are two things. I provide free support on the WordPress.org forum.
Mm-hmm.
I spend a lot of time on that and I like doing that because, first of all, performance optimization, as we already discussed, specifically when talking JavaScript, it can be difficult. You can break your site, and in order for people to trust autoptimize, they need to know that they will receive help if things break, and that's what I try to do consistently. And if people have problems, they can come ask, and I offer assistance for free. I won't log in to their sites. That not, but I do offer support, and generally people are very happy with that. So if people want to take a step further, they can go to autoptimize.com, and there they will see the professional services we offer, which do include us logging into the site and fixing things ourselves. So that's the difference. If we have to log on, you'll have to pay. If I can help like that, it's for free.
Awesome. So it's autoptimize.com, right?
Indeed.
Okay. Thank you, Frank, for your time. It was amazing talking to you. I hope you also enjoyed it. Our optimized talk.
I absolutely did. Very much.
Okay, man. Have a good day.
You as well, Arvind. Have a nice day. Bye.